very exciting to announce two of, to me, authorities on digital health in a way, just because of how much they've been exposed to them, how much they've affected the industry and created it essentially in their markets. We have Ali Parsa, he's the CEO of Babylon Health, and he has been really leveraging both telehealth and AI in many different countries to really drive costs down and make healthcare accessible for a lot of people. And they've been growing a lot lately. He has a lot to share, a lot of different perspectives between the UK and working with the NHS to Rwanda, and a lot of things for him to share. And we have Matthew Holt as well, personal inspiration of mine, very proud to be hosting him today. Matthew is the co-chairman of Health 2.0, and he's created that. It's the biggest digital health conference in the world, one of the biggest places that have created this industry, bringing, not just the startups, but also government, providers, hospitals, insurance companies, pharma, and putting them all together in a room and helping them create an ecosystem. And we'll have some questions to him about that, about how we can implement similarly in the Middle East. And then Abdulatif Ulama, who to me is one of the most knowledgeable people about the Middle East because of his role as Chief Growth Officer of Al-Tibbi, which has been a rapidly growing telehealth platform in the Middle East. They are the official providers of the Jordanian government. They've done a lot of work with the Egyptian government in providing free telehealth consultations for millions of Egyptians. And right now has been working in the Gulf, in Iraq, and a lot of interesting places too. So he's going to tell us a little bit about the opportunities there.
And last but definitely not least, one of my favorite people to bounce around ideas with, Dr. Ahmed Morsi, who's a biomedicine professor at Cairo University and also the founder of Nebras Technology, providing next-generation clinic management solutions for dentists and now other specialties as well.
We're going to then jump from that section to AI in healthcare that's going to be moderated by Dr. Ahmed Morsi. So without further ado, just quickly like to thank Eva Pharma for giving this platform. And I'd like to introduce Abdulatif. You ready to get us started?
Yes, for sure. So the question is for Ali. What are our biggest opportunities for digital health in the Middle East? What do you think, Ali?
First and foremost, thank you for the invitation. It's an honor to talk to you and to the team tonight. Many countries in the Middle East have a long tradition of provision of healthcare. You go all the way back to Ibn Sina, and you know how much Middle East have contributed to the creation of what we know today, or we call the Western healthcare system, and how much of it was originated in the Middle East. The question today is that we are in this interesting juncture whereby we could continue doing what we used to do, and we just know that what we used to do does not really work anymore the way that we expected. Let's put this in perspective. We spend $10 trillion annually on healthcare globally, and we leave 50% of the world behind. Half of the population of the world have no access, according to the World Health Organization, to healthcare at all. 5 out of the 7 billion people have no access to secondary care at all. Even in countries as rich as UK, where I am based, or the United States, where Matthew is based, if you have a complex problem like mental health, we have almost pitiful service for anyone. Today, like any other night, I always use this example, 2,000 people will sleep in the county, Cook County jail near Chicago for no other reason but because they have mental health issues. That's what we do. Even in the Western world, 70% of our inmates in jails have no other criminal or crime, but initially having had a mental health issue that wasn't dealt with until it got into addiction or the drugs, and then a life of crime. So if we do such a bad job in the Western world with mental health, what is the point of replicating that model now in the Middle East? Einstein used to say the definition of insanity is to repeating doing what you do and expecting a different results. Middle East has a unique opportunity, not just Middle East, but much of the developing world have a unique opportunity now to learn from the lessons of what hasn't worked and to look at the technologies and what the world is to try to reinvent the model of the delivery of health. And a model that says, I wait until you get sick and then I deal with your crisis is not the right model for anybody to deal with. That model, what we call healthcare in the West, in reality is sick care. We don't look after you until you hit a crisis, then we take you to emergency, we try to fix you, then we leave you alone again until you hit your next crisis, right? That is not healthcare. So what can we do in order to keep you at the peak of your health? And today we have the ability, the technology to try and do that. We can monitor you 24/7. We can see the signs of problems when they grow, and we can start dealing with those issues when the problem is a $10 problem before it becomes a $100 solution. What I don't want to do is carry on a long speech on this, but I hope that during this conversation, as we have, we can explore and unpick this more to demonstrate how a digital-first approach that puts healthcare ahead of sick care, that tries to keep people healthy rather than wait for them to get sick, it's a more appropriate approach for Middle East. And I think that some countries are already starting to do this. I saw a action by the health ministry in Saudi Arabia, where they're starting to say, how do I do a digital-first approach and a primary care comprehensive integrated solution?
We want to learn about this. How are governments reacting to this?
So I think some government, I mean, look, we have a much less involvement in Middle East today, although we have big plans for it, hopefully working with you in LTB2 for the Middle East coming forward. But we think, as I said, Middle East has an opportunity. The opportunity should be doing with provision of care that doesn't just say, hey, if you're ill, go see a doctor, but says that, hey, if you have a question, let me answer that question. If you want to have any plans, let me monitor you, provide you with coaching so that you can reach that plan. If you have any issues that you want to clarify, let me give you a health assessment to help you clarify that. If you do need to have a doctor, let me press a button so you can talk to a doctor. And if you only go to a hospital when that doctor needs you to go to a hospital. So instead of going and investing a huge amount of money, building beds that are almost irrelevant later on in future, let's invest in the healthcare of people today, as opposed to infrastructure of hospitals that stays unusable. A leader of one of the Middle Eastern countries gave me a great example. They said that back in 1995, they made a resolution to build many, many libraries across the country. And they made a huge investment of building libraries from villages to towns. And on the same year, 2 young PhD students in Stanford created Google. Today, all those libraries are sitting empty, and everybody's online using Google to get the information they want to get to. And that is what we could do with healthcare today. We could build in Middle East the healthcare of future rather than invest in the healthcare of past.
Can I just add on that one? The good news in America, because there's so much of a digital divide and there's so much inequality, is the library is the place where poor people go to get access to the internet now, which is not the way you should be building it. But I'd just like to add to Ali's point. I mean, I've been looking a lot outside of healthcare at some of these industries that are changing fast. And if you think about people now in the US and Canada who are trying to build this keystone pipeline across the country, billions of dollars, and across Native American reservations with a huge amount of political fuss about it. If you look at the price of solar power, especially being generated in hot places like the desert of Arizona or California, or the Middle East or whatever, much of that oil that's very expensively being dug out of tar sands in Canada is just going to be unnecessary, and that pipeline will be a stranded asset, like some of the hospitals that Ali's talking about. So I think that you have to think about planning for the future, and Ali's dead right. The future of healthcare delivery, whether it's preventative care, minor acute care, serious acute care, chronic care, is going to look very different, and we have to think about planning for that future, and that's the opportunity now. And COVID has kind of shoved that in our faces very rapidly. Sorry to interrupt you, Ability.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much, Matthew. Omar, Yara.
Yeah, Latif, you can keep on going with.
Yeah, you can keep going.
I have a lot of questions.
For 20 more minutes.
Yeah, we're not going to interrupt you until 8:35.
Yeah.
Unless you want us to.
No, interrupt as you wish. However, what advice would you give startups just entering or wanting to enter the health tech space in the region? Ali.
I feel really bad about in the presence of Matthew, who is one of the people that taught me digital health, and I think when it comes to advice on that, I'll first, just to play this equally, I'll first let Matthew come in onto this, and then I'll come later if you allow me. Please,
well,
Matthew.
The obvious answer is you raised $500 million from the Saudis, but
Yeah,
now that may not be available to everybody. So the challenge to me in the Middle East has been something that has I'm no expert in the Middle East. I follow Chris Schroeder and others who know that area well, and I've been to Dubai a couple of times and been to Jordan. But the challenge is, except Israel, which I know is there but not actually part of the Middle East politically. And
funny.
If you ignore what's going on in Israel, where there's a lot of activity, the money and the activity in the Middle East are in different places, right? So the money is in the Gulf states and in Saudi Arabia and what have you. The entrepreneurial fervor and the people building the stuff are by and large in Jordan and Egypt, as far as I can see. So the reason Silicon Valley works is because the government spending in terms of the education and finance for research at the big universities started there. The entrepreneurial sort of fervor plus venture capital, the ability to sort of build these companies and have capital and not be stuck in a big corporate environment where it was tough to move stuff around and tough to get decisions made, was here as well. And then the immigration and sort of culture, the immigration policy and the culture allowed a lot of people to come from all over the world, including me, but a lot of other people to come and build new companies and try it. And so you needed those sort of three buckets. And I don't know if the Middle East has got those enough in one place to build enough of an ecosystem as quickly as you might like. But I think that's kind of where you've got to try and figure out how do you move the money and the people and the ecosystem around. Assuming that can be done, right? Strikes me that the next piece is, how do you make a choice about what you're doing? In the end, we need to get to what Ali talked about, which is what I call Indu Samara, me and my co-founder Health 2.0, wrote this piece a while back, and we've been talking about this for a while, called Flipping the Stack. So very briefly, what I mean by that is that used to be we did care delivery, which was a doctor, a patient in the same place. And then we kind of layered services on top of that. And then eventually we put technology on top of that to try to figure out what we were doing in that care delivery and those services. Now, and we'll talk much more about this, with telehealth, AI, sensors, et cetera, all the stuff that's been built in Silicon Valley, people like Ali are building. What's happened next is that we're slowly getting the ability to flip that stack, which means that you can start with the technology, which is, we're on it now, right? The prevalence of Zoom and activities like that, the communications, easy access to the house, pervasive internet, then sensors, then all the other stuff that you hear about, roll that on the top. Put that in first, figure out who needs what of that. And you first off have, in the telehealth realm, you have people who can't get out or want to do the convenience of a quick telehealth visit. But that's slowly atomizing into many different pieces as you get asynchronous telehealth or automated telehealth, which is kind of argue what Ali's doing with Babylon. And then you say, okay, if we're managing these folks all the time, and Ali talked about people with mental health who don't get talked to easy, but if you use the scale of the technology to get to people as quickly as you can, then you can start adding on the next bit, which is what other services do they need? Who has more acute, more aggressive chronic illness or more serious acute illness that needs the next phase? And eventually, who needs to go to see a real doctor and maybe go to a real hospital? You've inverted the pyramid, completely. So my suggestion for the Middle East is again, not a market I know that well, is that work with the governments and the leading thinkers, it's probably folks like you, in the group here, to figure out how do you enable that to come in and be kind of the vision that everybody has for the future, as opposed to the problem that you have in the UK that Ali's been running into, lots of stuff going on with Babylon, but not just with Babylon, and in the US, where you have these large incumbent organizations who make their money in a very different way. And if you come in and say, we have a vision to get to this new place, and it doesn't really include them, or they have to change radically, you're going to have a systemic, typical revolutionary problem. And that's what's happening in healthcare elsewhere. You're having that fight, and you're having pushback, and you have regulation issues and all kinds of stuff. And as I said, this isn't just happening in healthcare, it's happening in energy creation and automation in many other fields. So I would be saying is that try to find that, what the Americans call the open field, the open area where you can see that goal line and get the people who are in government or in, or the physician leaders to try and go there with you, rather than sort of fight the incumbent power where they are, because that's tough. And I'm making this up, there's probably hopefully less established incumbent power in the health sector of the Middle East than there is, say, in the US and the UK.
Abdullah, can I add to what Matthew said on flipping the stack?
Please do.
Yeah, I just give you an example of this. There is, and it goes back to the very first question that you asked, Abdul Latif, which is, how do you bring digitization to the Middle East? What should Middle East do, right? And so there was two approaches when COVID-19 happened. One was, at the very beginning, everybody rushed to the hospitals, to the emergencies, to the clinics, and it just got them completely blocked. So if you look at what happened to Mount Sinai in New York, complete blockage of the system, right? Then the infection got to a level that they had to shut down the clinics and the doctors' facilities or the facilities. And what we then saw was a massive migration of those doctors onto telehealth. And then the telehealth companies started saying, wow, look at us. Our numbers are growing double, triple, quadruple, right? But what that exposed was that the lack of ability of that model of replacing a doctor behind a chair to a doctor behind a mobile phone with any kind of saving or a scalability. A doctor behind a phone costs exactly the same as a doctor in thing, and it's the same problem. So then you have this issue frankly, where is the saving from, right? Because if you look at the saving in the cost in healthcare, they sit in two places, right? They sit in salaries. Almost 2/3 of all the money spent in healthcare goes into doctors, nurses, healthcare professionals, executives' salaries. And if you cut it by diseases, it goes into predictable, preventable diseases are responsible for 70% of all our costs. So almost everything we do in Babylon, it's about how do you automate as much as possible of what a human being does on one hand, and how do you, on the other hand, try to predict the disease to solve it when it's a $10 problem before it becomes a $1,000 problem. There's no magic to making the costs less. that kind of just tackling the costs the hard way, frankly, through either automation or prediction, as well as what I said before, which is avoiding the almost insane model that says, I will wait for you to get ill and then deal with your crisis, instead of basically saying, I'm going to give you so much healthcare up front that you're not going to have any crisis or have as little crisis as possible, which is where the expensive part is. So what we did was, as soon as the COVID came, we basically started seeing what is happening on our platform. And the first thing we saw was people are asking a lot of questions, right? So believe it or not, Abdulatif, we had people calling our doctors to say, everybody tells us wash your hands. How do I clinically wash my hands, right? Something as simple as that, right? So we immediately turned this into digital reactions, right? So what we did was we immediately said, okay, we put in a video, for instance, on how you wash your hand. Very early on, among the first videos that came in, and about 100,000 people a day on YouTube watch that video. So far, about 2 to 3 million people watched it in the first 20 days of it coming out, or 30 days of it coming out, right? The second layer was, so the first layer was just provision of a lot of information. The second layer was, hey, I have a symptom. Can I see whether this is COVID or do I have to be worried? So we digitized exactly the same protocols the doctors have to say. And to be frank, there is nothing AI about this at all, right? It's just a very simple algorithms of a decision tree almost. If you got this, that, the other, and they interact that way, yes, you should put yourself in a house, right? But we did that in 2 to 3 days, right? We did it very fast. So our patients didn't need to come to us. Then when they were home, we said, you need to be monitored. So we put in our monitor capabilities, your temperature, your mood, how you're feeling, all of that kind of stuff. So you can monitor yourself. Then we added another stack, which was, if you need to talk to a human being with a series of repeatable, simple questions, why should you talk to a doctor? We put a clinically supervised human being to talk to them. And if you think about it, the digital layer costs 50 cents. Talking to another person in live chat costs $5. By the time they get to talk to a doctor on telemedicine, it costs $50, right? And if you go to a clinic, it costs $500, right? So you're basically trying to get everything done. What Abdulatif do you think was the percentage of the work that we could do with either digital or with live chat before we even allowed anybody to talk to one of our doctors? The answer is 80%. 80%. So we managed to triple the number of patients that we were looking at without adding almost a single doctor to our staff. That is true scalability for you. Just going and running around and trying and put more and more doctors on your system to try and get it done, that doesn't show. The point of technology is not that if there is no scalability, there is no technology, if you ask me, right? And that's the point. And that's what Matthew, I think, means by flipping the step. We just need to think about the solution in a fundamentally different way, rather than replicating the existing system, putting the word digital in front of it and say that's a solution.
Yeah, I just add two quick points to that. One is that Ali has an advantage, because in some parts of the world, West London and Birmingham, is that right? You have two parts of the stack, right? You have the clinic as well as the AI underpinning, and yes, you can then vary that ratio and figure it out. The second is that if you look at the hospitals that work very successfully to have this sort of quick flip around from being, or the organizations in the US that went from in-person to telehealth very quickly, the ones that did it very successfully also didn't just they didn't just do a quick replace. A lot of people in the US struggle and ended up using FaceTime and just simple telephone and whatever else, to replace it, and didn't have systems. And a lot of the big companies, the American Wells and the folks who raised a ton of money yesterday and others, struggled to get it going. But the people who worked well, if you look at MedStar, who is a tiny company called Bluestream Health, which I know pretty well, they not only did they sort of get the process for getting people onto their system very quickly, they also figured out a sort of triage mechanism. They'd already been using it to some extent, but they figured out a triage mechanism whereby you get routed to the right place very quickly, depending on your question. And what Ali's talking about is putting an automated front end onto that triage system that can, send you to the right place as quickly as possible. And the fewer of those places that need to be, with human beings, kind of the better. Now, that doesn't mean, I know, Ali, you've had some controversy about this, that your AI should claim to be all singing, all dancing, and know everything. It doesn't have to go through testing, and there's a lot. We're in early stages of this transition. We don't have. We're kind of like when they first did the driverless cars, and they had like the U.S. Defense Department had the contest of going from Los Angeles to Las Vegas across the desert. They didn't have traffic lights to deal with, and they didn't have. We're in that stage, I think, of the AI part of this. But the telehealth stuff has been around for a long time. But as Ali says, if you just replace, if you replace a in-person visit with a telehealth visit, you save some time in traffic for the patient, but that's about it. And there's a bunch of stuff you can't do. And actually, the telehealth visits are starting to fall very slightly in the US just the last couple of weeks.
Omar, there have been a lot of interesting questions coming in.
Yes, indeed. We can jump right into them. A lot of people are asking questions. We have some before and some after. But my first question is to Matthew. Matthew, you have a show called Health in 200 that I follow almost every week now. You guys have an episode about what's going on with investments and where the money is exciting for digital health right now. And we're wondering, some of our audience are asking, what kind of investments are you expecting to see more of after COVID-19? And, reflecting on the global implications, both in like the US and what you'd expect in an area like the Middle East investment landscape.
Well, I'd say quickly that the obvious thing to see is to look at what's going on in the public markets. Or the quasi-public market that Ali's in, because he raised a whole lot more than the average IPO in the US has raised. But there aren't that many companies public, but the ones that are, the two most notable ones here are Livongo, which is doing chronic care management at home, and Teladoc, which is doing remote care, both direct for employers, but also working. And American Well, which raised a ton of money yesterday, didn't get IPO, but same sort of thing. They've grown very rapidly. So what's going on there? This is typical work from home. My daughter has showed up and is demanding I pour her some drink. Run away from people, cocoa, and then run away. Oh, you're taking that? Oh, she's keeping most of the ball. Then you can run away from it. So I think the answer to your question is people are starting to see how do we do that automation part, how do we do that remote care part. The other part of healthcare, and there's been a lot of money invested in this, is how can you make the current system, the current hospitals and doctors and drug companies work more effectively and more efficiently. And so a couple of the companies that went public last year, Health Catalyst and Phreesia, are both in that bucket. Health Catalyst does analytics. Phreesia does kind of check-in for the front office of a primary care doctor. And there's a lot of stuff that's been poorly done in terms of, across the board in healthcare. And we're seeing people use AI, within hospitals. Companies like Qventus are using it for things like managing flow in emergency rooms and operating rooms and that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of places where modern technology can come and improve the current healthcare system. But I think the most interesting stuff is where can we start building for that greenfield in the future? And I think that's kind of where so Babylon's clearly in that space. As a Teladoc. Ali and me have had a private conversation about them. They're an interesting company, but they're clearly in that space as well. American Well too, and then a lot of companies are trying to figure out how do you do what Ali's talked about, which is to extend the ability of technology and, in some cases, lower cost clinical staff to do what was done previously by more expensive clinical staff. And by the way, this is a very particular American problem, because if you look at the data about why does American healthcare cost so much more than everybody else's, it's because the prices we pay for everything, including clinical staff, are much higher than they are because they're not controlled by the government. They're controlled by the healthcare system. Lucky healthcare system.
Well, we actually got a follow-up on that. How do you see both adoption and government regulations changing with that? Do you see any real changes in government regulation so far when it comes to telehealth?
In the US, there's already been a significant change in government regulation. When COVID started, there are a lot of parochial problems including things like you can't practice across state lines. So a doctor in New York can't see one in California. A lot of that got taken out. as a temporary measure, but I don't think it'll ever come back. By the way, in the UK, you may not know this, Ali, income tax was brought in, and I'm sure it doesn't impact you, but income tax was brought in the UK in 1915 for the war as a temporary measure. Hasn't quite gone away, right? So sometimes temporary measures stay around. The other thing is so a lot of this stuff around, payment was extended for the Medicare program, the wide area. The bigger question, so regulations change, payments change a little bit. The bigger question that you're going to see in the US in particular, it's a very strange system. The Americans cross-subsidize general provision of healthcare by allowing providers to charge very high fees for basically for procedures, for surgery, primarily surgery and stuff like that, which is why American specialists get paid so much more than they do anywhere else in the world. It's become apparent, if you say, because of COVID, we can't do knee replacements or hip operations or heart surgery, whatever, the income of the surgeons and the income of the hospitals that are the hotels for those surgeons collapsed, right? And it becomes clear that those hospitals are all losing money because they can't cross-subsidize to the regular care of people with pneumonia, COVID, whatever, from the lack of surgery. So some people have been talking, I've been talking about this for years. My colleague Ian Morrison wrote a piece about this. George Halverson, previous CEO of Kaiser, wrote a piece on the healthcare blog about this week. How do you fix that? Now, that's back to the big structural problem I talked about before, which is that the people who are doing that, the surgeons doing that surgery, whether it's necessary or unnecessary, and the hospitals that are hosting it and making money off all the procedure, off all the stuff that goes around it, aren't very interested in getting away from that model. They'd rather just go back to business as usual. But it clearly, as a system-wide thing, makes no sense to pay Americans that way. And we're going to have to go to some kind of global budget, pay for outcomes that is, where some other countries like the UK and to some extent Germany and elsewhere are going to. And or we're going to have to add in probably what you see in Asia, and I know as much about this than I do, but Asia, at least, which is sort of cash-based payments for simple stuff.
That's very interesting. Also seeing the other perspective of how healthcare is reacting to it, not just the digital health community, and how payments can change. And we do have another question for Ali. Yora, you want to throw in a question? It's very related to what Matthew closed off on before we move on to the next section. Yora, you're on mute. The classic thing said on all webinars.
Always this loop of Zoom where I can't hear you or you're in mute. Hi, Ali. First, it's a pleasure to have you here. And we want to understand more about your expansion plan. So we understand that you're in Rwanda first. So why Rwanda specifically? Well, it definitely is leading within the healthcare market and progressive minister and so on, but can you tell us more about this? And the other thing from the audience is that we actually have one of the audience from Brazil. And coming from very far away, we need to answer the question. So they want to know if you're actually expanding to Brazil.
Diverse audience.
And South America. So they want to know if you're going to Brazil too.
First on Rwanda, our mission is to make healthcare accessible, affordable, put it in the hands of every human being on earth. We started with one of the richest countries in the world, where we're based, United Kingdom. The natural thing is, if you think about this, is you go to your neighboring country next door, right? Or to somewhere close to you. The reality is there was very little we could learn by going to France or even coming to the United States next, right? If you really want to do this right, you need to say, okay, where is somewhere that is almost diametrically opposite? So we can go there and we can learn from that. At any early stage of any company, you're about extreme experimentations. You're trying to learn. That's what you're trying to do. So we picked Rwanda because it's a small country. It's got a contained population. It's from a national income is among the poorest countries in the world, but from governance is actually among the best in the world, right? It just does, His Excellency President Kagame does a phenomenal job in managing the country. So it was an easy choice, and Rwanda taught us a lot. Look, we just signed, one of the highlights of Babylon is we just signed a deal with the government of Rwanda to provide a 10-year deal to provide digital first universal primary care to the entire nation. How many countries in the world have universal primary care? And Rwanda has that. And the reason they could do that is because we could reduce the prices to $1 almost per consultation. Right, if you just think about this, right? I mean, even in Rwanda, this is in a few dollars of consultation, we could reduce it to that. And what we learned in how to do that in Rwanda had a direct effect in what we could do in reducing the prices in UK. So that's why we went to Rwanda. Now, almost everywhere else is somewhere in between in terms of wealth or infrastructure or others. But you can't go everywhere all the time. The fastest way to lose your shirt, doesn't matter how much money you have, is to try and do everything at the same time. For us, really the key now, next to establish ourselves for the next 2 years, is United States of America. That's where all our focus is. We're not looking at the rest of Europe as such. We are gently expanding in other places, but our serious focus is in the United States. But in Brazil, in particular, we'll have a significant announcement, hopefully, to make shortly on Brazil. Brazil is a country we like a lot. It's really the largest, everybody knows, it's half of Latin America. And you're really not in Latin America if you're not in Brazil. So if you want to go somewhere of size, scale, and a country that needs our work and is ready for us, is Brazil. So we'll make an announcement on Brazil shortly.
Thank you, Ali. And one quick question, if you might share. We do have to move on to the next section, but Matthew actually just threw that, being the veteran interviewer. One question that pops into mind is, what are you doing with the language barriers of going to different countries? How are you translating the technology?
So our technology, one of the great things about AI is that also translation, AI can do a lot in translation too. So we have one of the papers that we published, for those who are interested, talks about machine-to-machine translation. It's one of the fundamental pieces of work we had to do in order to be able to translate from many languages to many languages. And that allows us to do very fast translation. And that only gets you so much. I mean, that gets you 80% of the way there for our stack of technology, which is quite a lot. But then we need to really get down dirty with humans to make sure we get the colloquial parts right, to get the details right. But look, we just launched with Prudential in 11 Southeast Asian countries in 15 different languages, I believe. And we did all of that in a space of 18 months.
Wow.
And in the United States, we did it in Spanish and in American when we launched. So, it's a lot of work to do.
That's fascinating.
And
it's good to hear that Ali realizes American and English are two completely different languages.
It is. That's very true. And Matthew, we got scars to show for it. Because the very first thing they did, and it's one of the lessons, I mean, look, every entrepreneur, and we're not doing this here, talks about their successes. The reality is for every one success you have 5 failures, 2 of which are embarrassingly bad, right? And one of the things was, for instance, when we tried to do the American English, we got an English men and women to do American English. And the first version was just bad, right? It took us too long. We did it badly. We learned from it. We moved on. At some stage, we have to do a conversation about all the things we did badly in our life in Babylon. Far too many entrepreneurs talk about all the amazing things they do. When I'm with them, I often feel really inadequate because I never hear about their failures. The reality is, for every one good thing you do 2 things badly. And it's just reality of life. The problem is not the mistakes you make. The problem is the reality is entrepreneurs should lose, but they should learn from that loss. We don't lose, we learn, right? And move on, right?
And certainly a lot to learn from that experience. And thanks for bringing that up. And we'll move now. So like this idea of thinking global is the theme of this webinar, and certainly a lot to learn from Ali's experience. And so thanks for sharing that. And Matthew, thanks for the awesome probe into language. That brought up a very interesting thing to all the digital entrepreneurs out there, which most of the audience is from. How do you go beyond just the borders of the country that you work in? Abdul Latif, I want to thank you so much for throwing in the questions and
it's been impressive.
introducing us to Ali.
I like the speakers very much.
Thank you so much, Abdul Latif, and I'll ask you to go off camera, but please stay with us. I'm just going to invite our next moderator. And before I do, I just want to, we asked the audience some questions about telehealth. And if you missed this poll, get ready for the next one. We asked them if they're comfortable using telehealth to receive care. Even in this advanced audience, it was still sometimes. Half of people think that they can only use sometimes, which is fair. When asked about the biggest obstacles, most said it was a tie between lack of trust and the regulations. Two things that are also very applicable to AI. And so I want us to shift into that conversation again to everyone in the audience. If we haven't asked your question yet, we'll have 30 whole minutes. You guys can also come on the audio and we can have you ask them live. But right now I want to hand over the mic to Dr. Ahmed Morsi, who's going to be digging deep into AI and whether that's a valuable thing or a lot of hype. How are you, Dr. Morsi?
Fine. Thank you, Omar. Thank you for having me. Great first part of the webinar. So I want to spend just a couple of minutes setting the stage here by talking about the landscape of artificial intelligence in healthcare, as I understand it. It's really a very interesting landscape. It's full of promises, lots of challenges, and a lot of hype. So let's start with the promises, which cover nearly all care areas. I will focus on two main areas. First is the one targeted at healthcare professionals and researchers. Stuff like virtual assistants for doctors and nurses, robotic surgery, drug discovery methods, clinical decision support systems, and CAD systems, and so on. The second area is actually virtual patient assistance, which is clearly targeted at patients and consumers. That's where Babylon Health fits. And a nice thing about promises made in this area is that they can take us from, as Ali said, from sick care to wellness care. So these are the two main areas. We can add two more areas. One is aimed at population health, basically prediction and detection of outbreaks. And the other is related to the non-medical part of healthcare, the administrative part, things like fraud detection in insurance and so on. I will not talk about challenges because much of my conversation with Ali and Matthew will be about challenges. I just want to very quickly mention one challenge, and that's what physicians call explainability. So when we started using deep learning, we were able to get much better results, better accuracies, better performance. Started getting these black boxes. So almost no explainability whatsoever. And now doctors actually are faced with a very tricky positions. They can either choose having lack of ability or lack of explainability solutions. And that's not a great position to be at, but that's definitely one of the challenges. And before I conclude this introduction, I want to talk briefly about hype. Hype is good and bad. It's good in that it actually creates a sense of excitement, which can help draw more resources to the field, resources like doctors, investors, techies, and so on. But it's bad because after a while, it starts distorting expectations and maybe killing enthusiasm altogether. And I want to finish actually by talking about the landscape area where it connects to entrepreneurship. And I'm sure that our expert guests will give pieces of advice regarding entrepreneurship, but here's one of my own, which is to try to focus on two main areas. One is upskilling, and the other is scaling up. Upskilling is to help a doctor who has only 3 years of experience, help them perform as if he or she had 13 years of experience. Scaling up of a service is to try to make it available to a bigger base of patients and of consumers by increasing its accessibility or increasing its affordability or both. So here is where I will stop and switch the side of the microphone, start asking questions. Good evening, Ali, and good morning, Matthew. Great to have you with us.
Thank you,
I
Ahmed.
want to start with you, Ali. And I actually want to start with the last point I raised in my introduction. Two of the main goals of health systems anywhere are access and cost, increasing access and reducing cost. How can AI help in this regard?
Thank you very much for that, Dr. Morsi. The issue with access and cost, look, access today is significantly less issue than it used to be. We talked about Rwanda. We now deliver healthcare to almost the entire population of Rwanda if they wish to have it. And there are many are in remote villages with difficulty to access. We don't need to put a clinic and take a doctor to that village. As long as people have a mobile phone, and in Rwanda is a feature phone, they can contact us, right? The problem is there is no accessibility without affordability. And as we just talked about this a few minutes ago, the issue of affordability of healthcare, it's all about cost of human beings in one end and cost of dealing with a problem too late on the other end. And on both of those, AI have a very huge role to play. Because on both of those, on one hand, if the artificial intelligence can deal with the questions I have and do so well, then frankly, it gets me a long way. So here is what we do. Imagine what is the problems you have. You wake up, you have a symptom. You want to know what's the diagnosis for that symptom. And actually, diagnosis is a matter of intellectual curiosity in a way. What you really need is what is the treatment. And as you know, it takes 17 years for best treatment to become common treatment. So how do you know that even when you talk to a doctor, the treatment they give you is the state-of-the-art treatment for the problem you have? Then when you have the treatment, how do you kind of make sure that that treatment it's applied and correctly and it's followed? And then sometimes, unfortunately, you don't recover. You have a chronic condition you have to manage for life. Everything I just described is sick care. There's no reason why we can't do some of this with AI. So 40% of our users, when they use our AI, they basically get to an answer that satisfies them and they don't need to come and talk to our doctors. And in a capitated model, that is a significant cost saving for us. It's also a significant matter of satisfaction for them. When they do come to our doctors, the AI has asked them all the questions necessary that the doctor needs in the first instance. So we don't need to waste the time of the doctor asking those questions over and over again. So we can now save a few minutes, usually about 30% of the time of the consultations on that. And then the machine can also help to write the notes, which doctors have spent anything between 20 to 40% of their time writing. So if you just take that 40 plus 30 plus the 20 to 30 at the end, and compound it, you get to about 70% cost saving. And that's how we can manage to deliver end-to-end primary care at a capitated fee of, say, $100 or so in United Kingdom for an entire year, or in Rwanda for $1. So it helps. Professor Morsi, you said something very important. And I think I want to emphasize that, because on one hand, I said all the good things AI can do. But on the other hand, I need to emphasize how much in its infancy it is today. And the only people who really hype the AI often are the journalists. Sometimes about 2 years ago, this is absolutely true story. 2 years ago, we came up with a paper at an event. And in the event, we showed that under strict test conditions, we managed to get our AI to perform our part with primary care physicians, but under the strictest conditions and only for a set of primary care diseases, right? There was a journalist from the Forbes, and she went in and wrote that this machine just beat AI, beat doctors in AI, right? Completely, almost a massive exaggeration and hype on what we said, right? The very same journalist, 6 months later, wrote another article accusing us of hyping our AI, right? The very same, right? So what you see is that there is this bit about something becomes fashionable. You could just see it in the share price of Amazon. If you ever go and look at the share price of Amazon from when it went public in 99 or whenever it was, you see this massive hike in valuation because of what you just called hype. Then the reality fits. And actually, if you follow what Amazon has stated, they never really pushed that hype, right? Then the reality of how hard it is came in. And the share price of Amazon almost did nothing from 2001 to 2007 and 8. Because that's how long it took for them to really build the infrastructure, the capability to actually deliver. Sorry?
Very reasonable description.
Yes. And then around 2008, the promises started delivering, and they started growing really fast to a point that if you invested in Amazon in 2008, today you'll be a very rich person, right? Yes. So, but it took them a very long time of delivering the hype that wasn't created by them. We should be really careful, very careful, to constantly remind people how much it's in its infancy AI is, on one hand, but on the other hand, equally, how big its promise is going to be eventually. And to get there, we need to invest today, we need to work today, because those who are not participating in this revolution will be fundamentally left behind. The non-AI model of healthcare in a number of years from now will be a non-existent model of healthcare.
Yes, and that's a very balanced approach. Thank you very much for the insights, Ali. And please call me Ahmed. Just call me Ahmed. So, Matthew, I want to switch to you. I also talked about promises, lots of promises. And one way to extinguish the hype is to show success stories. So I have two questions for you. First, where are the biggest success stories for AI in healthcare? And second, why do we see more success stories for AI outside of healthcare than inside?
Well, I think there are the answer to your second question is easy. It's because there's been more money spent and there are more obvious applications, and healthcare is more complicated. So if I'm using AI to suggest operational improvements in a process that's pretty well known, or I'm using AI to tackle a question where there's a huge amount of data existing already, and that data's been in an easy to understand format, like in advertising or some of the online transactions that you see, or in banking or finance or stock trading, then I think it's a somewhat easier target. And in some cases, it's a bigger target. Right now, healthcare is a huge industry, but it's really a lots of tiny industries all cobbled together and called one thing. So I think the reason is that, and then the next thing is that we are discovering stuff about medicine and healthcare every day. I mean, Ali mentioned the 17-year problem of getting stuff from when it's defined as being the correct treatment into everyday practice takes 17 years. There's another famous quote, and I'll get it wrong, but it's something like, if the average doctor spent 2 hours a night reading a journal article of all the new things coming out in their field, at the end of the year, they'd be 7 years behind, or something like that. We're creating more medical knowledge all the time. And it's almost impossible, it is impossible for any one human being to capture that. I mean, Dr. House was a great TV show, another great British success story in the US, by the way. Hugh Laurie, but coming to the US and pretending to be an American, but it's not reality. You're not going to have, we know that diagnosis and treatment are really big problems, and they're done very poorly, even in the current healthcare system. So I'd say that the problem is very big, and that's why it's going to take a long time. And frankly, the investment in doing this in healthcare has been relatively small up until now. I mean, aside of, Ali, you raised a whole lot of money last year. I hope you haven't spent it all yet. But I mean, there have been people, and IBM Watson's had a crack at this and what have you. But compared to the R&D that's gone into other parts of analytics, around stock trading or internet trading, around what's happening on the internet, the money I'm sure that Amazon spends figuring out where they should put the button on the screen to make you click it more, or the same thing that Facebook does on where to put the like button. I think the money that's gone into healthcare has been relatively small to this point. So that's why healthcare is behind. And I'd say it's a very complex problem, at least if not more complex than the self-driving car problem. And, Google and GM and Ford and Toyota have been throwing money at that for many years, and we're not quite there yet. We're getting there. It's going to be a big impact. We're not there yet. Mm-hmm. So where have there been success? So I think, in very precise areas. I would say the two areas that have been most successful, there's been a lot of augmentation of radiology and radiology readings, and a lot of work around that. And that's coming into labs as well. So a lot of automation of the sort of diagnostic part. I'd say that's one area. And then I'd say the next area where we've seen pretty good activity is in the sort of the bit that I mentioned earlier, which is helping the inpatient, helping the hospital facilities do better in terms of their flow and managing their activity better, in terms of operating room availability and people getting through the emergency room better and that kind of stuff. So the operation stuff. Where it's coming soon is the stuff that Ali, Babylon, and by the way, not just Babylon, a host of other companies are all involved in, which is can you do the scale expansion to allow basically that unnecessary layer of that doesn't really require a human be answered. And look, we can go back and forth. I know Babylon has its critics. There's a whole thing about, and we can go back and forth about the hype, and it's a great question on that sort of hype curve, which Gartner has their hype cycle. You can use the Amazon stock price. Roy Amara, who was president of the Institute for the Future, where I worked, said a quote which is often attributed to Bill Gates, which is that people overestimate the impact of any new technology in the short run, but underestimate it in the long run. But you can argue that yes, we should have got the press to be calmer about AI and diagnosis in the first place. You can argue that Babylon should have done a better job with their PR and communications around that one case of the heart attack that wasn't a heart attack or whatever. You can go back and forth on that, and that will continue. And if you put your head up above the parapet, as Ali's done, you're going to get people throw bricks at it. That's what's going to happen, right? And how you deal with that is how you deal with that. But that's just regular commerce and business and figuring it out.
Yes.
The point is, we're close. And I don't know, it's going to be Babylon, Ada, Informatica, just some European examples, or the folks here from Boy Health, and what is going to be added into things like American Well and Teladoc and Livongo. As you put more and more effort into the data science intelligence of these companies, you're going to get a couple of things coming back. One is more accurate diagnosis, because the computer will have seen more stuff and will be able to be like in radiology is a very tight box, right? If there's a mark here or a mark there, it's probably maybe an early stage issue with breast cancer or what have you. Primary care is all over the map. I've got a symptom, I can describe it any number of ways. It could be any number of things. But the more you tell me, the better the computer's going to get. And you should ask Ali after this how much better Babylon is today than it was 2 years ago. But I bet a factor of 5, if not more, would be my guess without knowing anything about the data. The second thing you're able to do is to help get, I think you called this the scale up problem earlier, Ahmed, which is get people who aren't as experienced to the answer closer, right? And there's a British company called Isabel, which has been in this for a long time, which is doing differential diagnosis. Can I give you a more likely explanation of what the diagnosis is? And you can see that the chart from that going forward is that, well, you can end up getting better and better diagnoses and explanations of how to treat people with access to the right care, because you know more about it. You don't have the misdiagnosis problem, which is huge in healthcare. And you can allow this to be managed by progressively cheaper and cheaper people, making what the professionals, the doctors, who've been to medical school for 5 years and done surgery residency for years and all that stuff, having them really practice at the very top of their licenses. And that's where the success is going to be. So I would say sometime around the time when we get self-driving cars commonplace on the roads everywhere, dealing with traffic lights and bicyclists coming out of side alleys and all the stuff they got to deal with, somewhere after that, we're going to have really good automated primary care explanation, which will get you to the right place. So maybe, I'm sure you looked at what I have.
Yeah, sounds great. I will quote you on that, Matthew. So
sometimes I can't tell exactly when that is. Well, I have one friend who's deep in the self-driving car thing. He says it's coming in 2 years, but maybe it's. And there are self-driving cars on the road now in Phoenix. So, who knows?
So back to you, Ali. I want to talk a little bit about adoption. So you said the potential is huge, but AI is still in its infancy, and I think slow adoption is part of that. So let's talk about some of the impediments for adoption. Is it really lack of accuracy? Is it lack of infrastructure, mindset? What is it exactly?
It's very curious.
Sorry, was that for me or
Yes, this is your fault. You have to sell a business. I just talk about the stuff.
Yeah, go ahead, please, Ali.
Look, adoption of anything in very early stages is always done by enthusiasts, right? They adopt something. I mean, everybody's familiar with it. It's called the Roger curve of adoption. It's first is about 1 to 2% of people who are extreme enthusiasts. They're the ones that when iPhone came in, they just queued outside the doors to get their first thing. And it's not, they don't adopt because your product is great. They often adopt because they want to say, that's who I am. That's my personality. I am an early adopter and look at me what I do, right? And good job, because they're very forgiving people who kind of put up with stuff you put out that may not be very good up front, right? So the first iPhone, you all remember, like my Nokia used to copy and paste beautifully, and I don't think iPhone for 2 years even copied and pasted, right? A text you wrote, you had to retype it all over it. So then there is about 10, 15% of people who we call early adopters, and eventually is what we call early majority. That curve is 5 to 6 years, usually. So if you look at even iPhone, it took, in its first 5 years, there wasn't really that many people. It was eventually it took off, right? And so I think this zeal for adoption, it's a mistake in my view, because the products, if you're talking about AI, are not good enough to deserve mass adoption often, right? I'm not talking about our product or somebody else's product. I'm just talking generally, right? So believe me, we have enough of our critics, and this will be all over Twitter tomorrow. He said his product is not very good, right? I'm just talking generally, right? So it is what it is, right? And it takes time. It's a big problem, as Matthew just outlined, and a big problem takes big time to solve. Often the problem is not that. The problem is the way startups are financed. And the way they're financed, and Matthew sits in Silicon Valley, so he'll tell you more than I can, but the way they're financed is they're usually financed with somebody with very little money who gives you seed capital. You have 15 months to get a product, then they give you VC capital. You have 18 months, 2 years to get to revenue. Then you have to get growth capital. And it's often these people, that cycle forces you through fast adoption or getting adoption there. And you could do that if you're trying to solve a small problem. But if you're trying to solve a significant problem, like self-driving cars, like AI doing the job of a doctor, part of the job, small part of the easy part of the job, these things take time. These are significant problems taking significant time and significant amount of capital to do. And there are not that many people who do them. And that's why it works, right? Having said that, look, we're an accidental AI company. We're there because it's a tool we need in order to do what we want to do, which is to make healthcare accessible, affordable, and put it in the hands of everybody. Frankly, we have no desire to have created these technologies ourselves. And actually, one of our rules in Babylon is if somebody else has created the technology, go use theirs. And because the limited resource we have, there is so much that hasn't been created that we need to focus on ourselves. So this is not about us. This really is about the industry as a whole. Has a long way to go. But as Matthew said, whatever its promises today, it will deliver so much more than its promise today, right? And all you gotta do, by the way, Ahmed, is just look at the technologies that are coming alongside us, right? Just look at the power of quantum computing. Today, it's unstable, it's unusable, but one day it will become stable and unusable. And if it's not quantum computing, maybe biological, right? And that is 100 million fold faster than the best supercomputer we have, or has a more power of processing. I mean, that basically means, just putting this in perspective, if I'm sitting on the top of a turtle today, that is not like sitting on the top of a supersonic jet. It's equivalent of sitting on the top of a spaceship multiplied by 170 in terms of how much power it gives you, right? When you think about the Internet of Everything, where I can collect data not just from my watch, but from my wearables, from my clothes, as they expect 100 billion devices out there, imagine how much more data I have than the data that we have today on this. When you compound these things together, the promise is just astounding, right? And that is just in the realm of technology. You add things like augmented reality, so the way we can interact with it. You add the robotics, so the way we can just add to it. It is unbelievable what is coming out the way. And then you go to biology, and you see what synthetic biology is doing. Today we have a mice that can sing like a bird. We have a rat that is 6 times more intelligent than a normal rat. We have a worm that can live 10 times longer than a normal worm, and a tomato that does not age. We stop the telomeres degeneration inside the tomato thing. Yes. And we are at the beginning of this perfect storm of technology and biology coming together. For the first time as Homo sapiens, as Hariri says from your region, we are in a place of not just understanding life, but fundamentally re-engineering life or humanity. And whether that happens in my time or in my grandchildren's time, in the span of human history, we live in that unbelievable moment in time, which makes it both incredibly exciting, but also puts a huge burden of responsibility on my generation and my children's generation on getting this right.
Absolutely. And when you say it takes 17 years for the best practice to become common practice, it actually reminds me that the thermometer, it took 170 years to get mass adoption in the medical community for the thermometer, despite not lacking accuracy or scientific evidence. So now it's, I guess, 17, and maybe it will become shorter, but adoption has a whole bunch of different dynamics.
Talking about COVID, it's worth remembering that Semmelweis, in Hungary, an Austrian pyramid, who figured out the hand washing, was the thing which solved the infection rate amongst the mothers and the children he delivered. Yes. Was ignored by all of his professional colleagues and ended up in a lunatic asylum. So, got to be careful with this new introduction technology, right?
So, Matthew, I want to come back to you. Ali talked about access and cost, and the third universal goal is actually quality. And it's a loaded term. It includes safety, it includes efficacy, and it includes personalization and precision. But there's one component that I think is an integral component of quality, and that is compassion, because we are human beings. And my question to you, how do you think compassion can be impacted as we adopt more and more using chatbots in healthcare?
Well, I had a very interesting conversation with this a while ago, and I would just repeat it. So there's a guy called John Madison, who's one of my heroes, who was at Kaiser Permanente for many years. He's been looking at technology. He's a physician, but a techie physician who's been looking at this stuff for a long time, was very instrumental in helping them build out what is now, one of the better infrastructures for technology, even if it's built on not new technology. I mean, Epic, which is their big underlying system, which is now the world's dominant EMR company, is not new technology by any stretch of the imagination. But John, did a lot of work around that, built a lot of that out, knows more than anybody about virtually anything. And I asked him this question once on stage at Health 2.0. I said, we have all this technology, people are interacting with computers and all the rest of it. And he said, the point where you're going to see this arrive is eventually this technology will fade into the background, and that will give the human-to-human interaction the space to breathe. So I would take one teeny example, and Ali actually brought this up. Ali said, hey, when we have our system, we can take a bunch of information from the patient that saves time because they don't have to tell it directly to the doctor again. And there was, I believe it was Brigham and Women's, or one of the places which has started using a lot of telehealth very recently, said, in fact, they were having trouble because typically when a patient arrived in the exam room, a nurse or a physician's assistant would go, or a tech would go in and take the temperature and do the blood pressure. And this stuff would just be sitting there waiting for the doctor when the doctor walked in. And instead, the telehealth visit starts and the doctor goes, okay, what's your temperature or whatever? And I have my little blood pressure cuff here, and I could imagine spending some time blowing it up and then going, is that the right reading? And no, there was an error. And this was actually wasting time of the doctor. So if you flip, talk about flipping the stack or whatever I was talking about in the world, in terms of technology being in your clothes or whatever, if these readings, and not just, by the way, the point in time reading, but the trend, are you up or down? There are some things where it really matters point in time. If you have COVID and your oxygenation rate falls rapidly below sort of 70 or 80 or whatever the number is, that really matters right then and there. But if you're way out of line in your blood glucose, yes, that can be a big problem. But for most of this stuff, it's where are you in a range? And are you going to be measured and monitored consistently over time, so we can see where the exceptions are and where you're trending. And I think that the shift in the sort of humanity aspect of this is going to be, we're going to take a lot of the technical work away from doctors, technical recording, not the very complex technical work of surgery or the very complex technical work of understanding the progression of disease, but the bit about how do you talk with people about their condition in an empathetic way, explain to them what to do, and then use that sort of human factor to help them make the right decisions. Because a lot of what we're talking about in this use of AI is, can I figure out when it is that Matthew, who is trending towards diabetes because he eats too much and doesn't exercise enough, is going to have an ice cream? Is it some behavioral thing? Is it just he likes ice cream? We need to get him to keep it out of the house. What do we do? How do we help people in those areas? And if you look at companies who are spending a lot of money in the behavioral health area, or trying to do behavior change, not just behavioral health, folks like the Livongos and others, they're really focused on how do we make those impacts that change, that we can understand how to change people's behavior. But that's going to have to come through a human filter. And all those companies that have been successful are using not the doctors to do the first line of call, but Ali mentioned, like, it's somebody as a human being who has to explain it to you. And there are times you're going to need to have a human being explain to you something to you that perhaps you could have gathered from a machine, but you need that human contact. And I think the increase in the level of sort of trained empathy that all people in healthcare are going to require is going to be massive, because we've kind of trained that out of people in healthcare in the last few decades, and we need to get it back in.
Yeah. Thank you for the insight, Matthew. So I want to go back to Ali and follow up on what Matthew said. So do you envision health chatbots of 2025 to be more intelligent than today's health chatbots, and in what ways?
Ahmed, you and I come from the Middle East, and in the Middle East, we have a wonderful saying, which is, if you want God to laugh, you give her your 2-year plan. The truth is, none of us know how things go. There was time in history where, human progress actually took a back step. It didn't go forward, right? It took, when the Roman Empire, for instance, fell, it took almost 1,000 years to go back to the same level of production of ore than they had before the fall of the empire, right?
Not in the Middle East, Ali, right? The Middle East kept going. It was the Europe that collapsed.
Correct. Middle East did very well, and then after the advent of Mongols and others, that had its own challenges, right? So I think we these things are hard to predict, but you would have thought, assuming everything continues going the way it goes, the technology of 5 years from now will be in a fundamentally different place than the technology of today. And yet, you may see setbacks. And some of those setbacks may have nothing to do with technology. It may be regulatory. It may be others, right? Or you may see what we just saw with COVID, which was an incentive, an imperative to fast forward the growth of technology. I actually believe that if you had asked me about the growth of telemedicine 6 months ago, in my wildest dream, I would not have told you where we are today. And because the problem was never technological, the problem was always cultural, right? The problem was always cultural. And now, with AI, the problem is technological. It's not just cultural. And I think the cultural problem is almost less, right? Because than what we think. I mean, look, all of us use AI all the time without question. Without question, right? I mean, I have a PhD in physics, and when I talk to my 17-year-old who's doing physics, and I explain something to them, they Google it, and they say, sorry, Dad, you're wrong. Right, here it is, right? And they change. And what does Google done? It's just a piece of AI that has found the most relevant answer for them. It doesn't make that answer correct, but in their mind, that is more correct. You and I will follow a map on Google on our thing to the end of the world, and we just assume it's going to be right. And if somebody sits next to us and say, no, I know this road, don't listen to this map, this is better, we say, no, you don't know about the traffic, this, that, the other, I'll follow the map, right? So I actually think in so many areas in our life, we are following AI with no problem at all. The problem is the AI takes a long time to become good, but when it becomes good, it's going to be good. Look, it's going to be good, right? I mean, I tell you, it is mind-boggling. I mean, we do these tests, right? It is mind-boggling how wrong people get stuff, right? I mean, there is a guy who spends a huge amount of time, one of my favorite kind of people, because these people act as massive alert system for us. They test our products to destruction, trying to find what is wrong with it. And then they alert us by putting it on Twitter and saying, Matthew referred to something about a woman's heart condition. And in that particular case, Matthew, by the way, as you know very well, women get a heart problem by average about 17 years later than men do. So actually, if you put those combination of answers in, the chances, and in that particular case, there was more issue with a panic attack in that case than it could have been with a heart attack. So AI gets it wrong just like a human being can. In that particular case, I'm not sure it got it wrong. But it's very interesting. Okay. This person did 2,400 tests on our system. 100 of them he reported as wrong. And he made a big song and dance on Twitter and da. Actually, that person was wrong in 60 of those 100 himself. Right, that he reported or manipulated the result. But in 20 of those, he was absolutely right. In 20 out of 2,000. And we fixed it, right, quickly. You just can't buy people like that. So I think people should, instead of being defensive about people who criticize them, they should say, look, don't ask where is somebody wrong. Ask what part of what they say is right. Right? And then focus on that part and fix that part and move on, right? And that way AI will become much better. At the moment, there's too much worried about defending your position. And it's just, I was a failed scientist. In science, you don't defend position. You try to discover the better solution by listening to everybody's point of view.
Well, gentlemen, I'm enjoying this thoroughly. Yeah, please, very quickly, Matthew.
Just real quick, just to... there's actually something right now going on the same in both countries, and you're involved in this one too, Ali, which is what is the correct way to use at-home testing for COVID-19? I know you just launched this, and there's some controversy in England about, I forget which, using the Abbott machine or whatever it is. And one of my friends, and I don't know if you know Manish Janega, who's sitting at home with COVID in the UK right now, has been like doing this trying to figure out how to get different tests from different sites and the rest of it. And the US is at a similar thing, right? Where the first early companies doing at-home testing, Everlywell and some of the others, came out and were sort of getting poor regulatory guidance or no regulatory guidance. They thought they were doing the right thing or the wrong thing. There's different understanding whether the swab works versus the one that goes all the way back up your nose. Different understanding whether which type of machine can reproduce at what pace. Then we have a great lack of understanding in COVID about how infected, whether somebody's already had it before. They have the sero testing, are they going to be infectious? So you get these areas where there's a lot of, the science isn't quite there, the understanding isn't quite there, and yet it's important for whether it's AI or non-AI, people to try to create solutions very quickly. And by definition, you're going to have mistakes. And don't forget, by the way, that in every day, in every hospital in the world, there are the usual number of people, the third reason, the first or second reason for being in the hospital is usually trauma or heart disease. The third reason is usually being in the hospital. They caught some condition, or there was some mistake in the hospital, some mistake of the system that put people there, right? So we have a huge amount of error and mistakes anywhere in the healthcare system. And so you can't expect people building new stuff and trying to create new solutions to get it right immediately. And I would say Ali's right. The way to do this is to be scientific. And, you may have, like I said, Babylon's put its head way up above the parapet and people throwing rocks at it. And, but there is stuff to be learned from the people throwing the rocks. There's no question.
Absolutely. Gentlemen, I'm enjoying this thoroughly. I have more questions, but Omar is giving me the signal. So I have to let go of the mic. Otherwise, I will get into trouble. Thank you very much, Ali. Thank you, Matthew. Omar, back to you.
Professor.
Thank you so much, Ahmad, for this amazing moderation and insights. You got out a lot of controversial and give us a lot of things to think about from both speakers. So thank you so much. We do have a lot of questions. We want to give the audience a chance to join us. I'm also going to start another poll about AI. We want to know what you guys think about 3 quick things, mainly if you've seen any success stories yourself, personally, that is. And while the polls run, I'm going to ask a couple of questions that came in. We have one very interesting one, but I know it's going to be big. And Matthew, I know you might have to drop early, so I want to make sure I direct that question to you first. So I'm going to give one question to Matthew and then a question to Ali, and then we'll open up the floor. So if any of you would like to join us and ask questions live, please do. So Matthew, my question is from our friend Mariam Shukrallah, who's from the WHO in Geneva. And she's asking about how can we guarantee that digitalization of healthcare is not contributing to further fragmentation or creating a parallel system, especially when governments are lagging behind in mindset and startups are avoiding governments for reasons that we know.
Well, you can't guarantee it. I mean, there are things going on. I mean, Ali mentioned him having a PhD in physics. If you had told me when I was a kid that the richest country in the world now had a major political party that flat out does not believe in science, I would, or that there are people who are, opposed to vaccination or what have you. There's a lot of stuff that you can't predict. And having said that, the opportunity for using technology to fix equity in healthcare is much greater than not using it, right? Because in the end, if you have only, you're going to have expensive professionals who need a lot of care and need to be concentrated in, or are going to be concentrated in places they live, which are going to be nice suburbs and big urban areas. You are not going to have as many professionals in rural areas, in poor areas, in poor suburbs. And then you're going to have the money of those areas is going to flow to those professionals. So, by definition, unless we have someone was talking about in the chat about Max Weber before, and I learned when I was at Cambridge, I didn't learn physics. I learned political science and learned a lot about Max Weber and Karl Marx, and so the way society goes, unless you have the big socialist revolution, even that probably won't do it. Figuring out how to spread healthcare equitably and get it across the world has been very challenging because, by definition, smart people live in rich areas and get attracted by money, and that's where you tend to concentrate facilities. So if you do this in the old world, you have to get there. And now you see in rural areas across the world, whether it's America, Russia, Canada, anywhere, unless you're in a very tightly compact European country, you're a long way away by driving your car from access to the best care. And if you have a complex condition, you may be hours by plane away from that. Mm-hmm. So the answer is let's take the best of those systems, which is really what the Allies and the other folks in the world are trying to build AI is doing, taking the best of human knowledge, improving on it, and then distributing it equally. So this has, I mean, what I just said sounds easy, but it's incredibly complex politically, because there are huge, as I mentioned earlier, a huge vested interest in every country who don't want to change the way they're doing things, and why would they? I mean, it's all very nice. I think other people should change, but I'm happy to stay the same and do what I'm doing, as long as I'm doing fine, right? So that's one thing. And then it requires political will to put that into place, and to take what's happening. I mean, Ali said civilization went backwards. Take 2016 as the year where civilization went backwards, right? the idea that we're moving towards this lovely homogenous sort of nice warm gentle liberal democracy where everyone's happy to spread the wealth and care equally is clearly not true. There are significant minorities in Western countries, maybe majorities in Western countries, who aren't that interested in sharing the wealth from their nice lifestyle with immigrants, minorities, people who don't look the same, who pray to a different God or what have you. And that's real. We have President Trump, Bolsonaro, Obama, a bunch of people that show that. So none of this is guaranteed. But I think the way you do it is you try to bring the system along with you, build the best technology, but bring the system along with you. So I think, whether or not Ali's critics are going to continue to throw the rocks, there is a meeting of the minds there, right? And the other thing is, as I said, like to my first answer to the first question, there are a significant number of leaders of healthcare, whether they're physicians or others, who are interested in doing the right thing here and spreading the technology and spreading it equally. And even in the finance world, you get people like Google who've invested in Cityblock, which is a new type of clinic and healthcare provider aimed at the poorest people in America, in the inner cities. I think that there is a way we can do this. Is it going to happen inevitably? Is it all going to be motherhood apple pie and the best healthcare for everybody spread equally across the world? No. But I mean, we're more likely to get there with better technology, especially building off all the things that Ali mentioned, especially the communications revolution. Mm-hmm. 5G coming everywhere, and hopefully not too many people think that 5G on the post is going to brainwash your cat or whatever the theory of it is, but it's perhaps going to make broadband access easy for everyone, which fundamentally is another utility that we need to get over the disparity.
Yeah, thanks. And you've actually
that's my political statement for the day. I'll try not to be so political.
You've answered a couple of questions actually, and especially when it came to 5G and its broadband. But speaking of things that don't change easily, I want to switch my question to Ali and ask him about doctors. So being a medical doctor who graduated from medicine, and I decided to change dramatically, but had to leave practice. So a lot of questions are coming in that I relate to a lot, because my dad's a physician. I've been trained around physicians. And so this idea of not robots never being able to do what we do is huge. And so there's a mix of questions that came in, and I want to share some of the comments first. Some of them answer each other. Interestingly enough, someone anonymously said, and you mentioned there are critics, and I think, Ali, you have critics because you are pushing the envelope, right? You are doing something that hasn't been done before. But one of the questions was someone asking about how 2 years ago you predicted, or you said that there's going to be an order of magnitude more accuracy in a software than human doctor. And whether you said that or not, there's an interesting quote that came in that actually is from Dr. Khalil Abdel Khaliq, who was the moderator of last session. And in the last HIMSS conference, he was representing the chapter there and heard an interesting quote that he shared with us, which says that AI is not going to replace doctors, but doctors that don't use AI are going to be replaced by other doctors that do. And so a big question for you, Ali, and I want to share the results of the poll too, just because it factors in as well. So it seems like people are 50-50 on the success stories of AI. Most people have not interacted with an AI system, and that's from a group of people that are very digitally oriented and forward thinking. Most people also seem to think that the best application of AI is in prevention rather than diagnosis. And that brings me to that question around adoption from physicians specifically, Ali. How are you seeing that change over the years? Are you seeing less resistance, and especially after COVID, are you seeing a change in any way?
So let me ask you something, Omar. If you asked your father and the physicians you know, would you consult a patient from a screen 3 months ago? What would they have said to you, by and large?
No, a lot of, especially my dad's a surgeon, so he believes in the human touch more than probably other doctors too.
Right.
But also a lot of doctors that are even dermatologists think it was a good idea, but were reluctant to use it, especially 3 months ago.
And today, almost every interaction in medicine is on the phone or on the mobile, on this, right? Overnight, right? Because it was a cultural issue. And when the necessity came, as a doctor, and vast majority of doctors are in the profession because they want to help and care, when they saw that there's no other way to help the patients, they did it that way. And I know many doctors who say that it's just absurd to go the other way, right? I mean, and just think about this. Just take this for a moment and think about it. You are a clinician yourself, right? So you say, I need to see a patient when they're very ill. That's great. But now think about that patient when they're very ill. They're sitting in bed, they're running a temperature, their head hurts, they're sweating like crazy, and you want them to make an appointment to come and see you, maybe wait 2, 3, 4, 5 days, in the UK, maybe up to 2 weeks, right? To come and see you, get on a bus, right? Maybe infect a whole bunch of other people, come and sit in your practice who might have somebody with another infection in it, and they have to wait until they come and see you, feeling that way, and then come and see you. And then you say, that is a better thing for that patient. Did you ask that patient whether that's a better thing for them?
I think we do that very little in healthcare, especially as doctors. We always know best.
How much do we think about humans' experience, right? So I think we need to think really seriously about this, that when all the critics on us didn't start because of our AI. It started when the British government said we can become the physician of people, and people have to choose whether they want their existing physician or they want to switch to us. And that's an unfortunate quirk of the British system, that you can't have 2 GPs. You have to choose one, and all your money goes with it. And what we saw was thousands of people a week switching, something that nobody believed it can happen. And that basically means people's livelihood get affected, right? People switch. But why were they switching? They were switching because it was a better model of healthcare for them. Is it a better model of healthcare for everybody? Absolutely not, but it's a better model of healthcare for them, right? So many people make evil out of Amazon. But if Amazon is so bad, why are so many people switching to it? Why are they using it, right? So because it's better for the consumer, for the user, right? So I think the question you're asking, its premise is wrong. Because it's saying that the person, let me just depersonalize this. It's like asking the librarians whether Google would have been the right model of distribution of information back in 95 to 97, 98, right? It really was interesting what the librarians said, but it's much more important what the users said, right? And I think the best doctors I know think that way. What the answer I just gave you is not my answer, is the answer of the hundreds of doctors who work for us. We are the largest employer of doctors, GPs in Britain. And that's their answer. That's why they work with us. The doctors are not a homogeneous group. They're highly, advanced early adopter doctors, and they're very advanced laggers. And the laggers have good reasons too. You shouldn't underestimate that. And finally, you said about AI and human. Look, there isn't a human being who can beat chess, an AI in the game of chess, right? But there is also no no AI who can beat the combination of a human being and AI in the game of chess, right? And I think that combination is good. And for now, and for a very foreseeable future, we do not think that having a machine we think that the machine can diagnose you maybe properly and better than a doctor at some stage. But we don't think a machine can put its hand on your shoulder and say, trust me, I'll take you through this, right? And so there is a role for a human being that we are a very long way before we see a machine. So we should stop looking at this as a combat. We should look at it as, look, half of the world population have no access to healthcare. There is no equity in healthcare. Zero, none. What are we going to do about this? How long are we going to watch people die while we sit and protect the existing system? It's criminal to support a system that has left so many behind. If that makes sense.
Yeah. A lot of it makes sense, and a lot of what we see does not make sense, and that requires a whole other webinar for sure. I want to hand it over to, but thank you for this answer, Ali, and I want to hand it over to Yara, my partner in crime. I want her to kind of wrap this up. She also wanted to invite people maybe to ask some live questions before our guests hop off. Yara, you are on mute.
Sorry. Yeah, here I am. So thank you, Omar. And there are actually so many interesting questions within the Q&As, but for the sake of time, we're just going to have a couple of more. And also because I'm very interested in hearing how would you respond to that. So the first one is, while a lot of governments, so the NHS, the UK, where Ali, you are investing heavily in primary healthcare, and they have always been, but this is not the case in many other places. Governments and investors and private sector still prefer the secondary and tertiary. So how do you even make, while they're not even investing in primary healthcare, the normal one, how do you even make the case for digitalization in primary healthcare?
So those who are not investing in healthcare are fundamentally wrong, in primary healthcare, are fundamentally wrong. And I think we are seeing more and more governments investing heavily in primary healthcare. As I said, I just saw the government of Saudi Arabia coming up with a significant RFP about reorganizing its healthcare to focus.
I'm working on it.
You're working on it. So
yeah.
you know. So this the idea that you could deliver healthcare without primary care is just fundamentally wrong. Because imagine I got a stomach pain. How do I know which kind of doctor should I go to? Do I go to a gastroenterologist? Do I go to a liver doctor, to a kidney doctor? Somebody needs to be my concierge, my entry into healthcare. So I think that we need to, this debate that you don't have primary care doesn't work. Patients need an advocate. And it's not about primary care or secondary care. It's about the model of healthcare, Yara. The existing model of healthcare basically says, get sick, we deal with your crisis. That is absurd. That is like waiting for you to starve and then feeding you and trying to deal with your dehydration and your lack of iron. And the right model of healthcare is to give so much healthcare upfront to people that they do not run to as little crises and emergencies as possible. And what we're arguing for is not really primary versus secondary, it's not really AI versus thing, it's not digital versus physical. It's actually about, let's just give people a lot of healthcare up front to avoid emergencies and expensive procedures downstream, right? And in the only way we can park a doctor in every human being's house to give them a lot of healthcare up front is to use a lot of technology. That's right, if that makes sense. I'm going to keep the answers really short so you can ask as many questions.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Heli. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And WHO has been advocating for primary healthcare since the 70s, since the Almaty Declaration, and we're moving forward, but slowly. And as you were saying, the new slogan is actually leaving no one behind. So hope this gets picked up more. And the next question for Matthew. So with Google, Facebook, Apple, Amazon investing heavily in AI, how do you see this playing out in healthcare? So how do you see the entrance of these massive tech companies in digital health. How is this going to change the future of digital health? If they're actually going to make like a massive difference, or so, what do you think about that?
Well, I mean, they have to go there now because of their scale, just because of capitalism, right? It's such a big chunk of the American economy. It's $10 trillion worldwide, as Ali said. $3 trillion and change of that is in the US. So that's why Ali's in the US, is why they've got to do that. Now, what does that actually mean? The answer is no one really knows exactly where they're going. What are they good at? They're good at laterally taking stuff that they develop for their web and online businesses and their productions around their devices and moving that to other areas. So they're going to be good at what they're good at. Google is going to be strong in the AI and storage area and moving that data into healthcare. And they're already supporting that with their cloud business. Microsoft will be too. Amazon is going to be good at the distribution and the management, the management of access to the consumer. You're going to see they've already started a small program initially for their highly paid office staff in Seattle. Now they've just extended it to their warehouse workers, who they've got to have a lot of those across the country, which is going to be a combination of telemedicine, drug delivery. They bought that company PillPack, behavioral health care, urgent care. They're basically building a primary care network because there isn't a good one in the US, and they're probably going to be rolling that out. Apple knows a lot about devices, right? Like this one. Not that one, that's made by somebody else, but you get the idea. And they're adding that to the watch. They're adding, they're going with the sensors and this, that, and the other, which are going to be around measurement and a lot of that. They've bought companies in the areas, tiny companies in the area of asthma and diabetes and sleep and elsewhere. And they've also started accessing records. They bought a company in the accessing digital health records space as well from providers. So they're all taking a somewhat different approach. I don't know what Facebook's going to do. I'm kind of concerned about them because they have been playing fast and loose with privacy for a while. But they're all going to come in. They're probably not going to come into the center of healthcare, although Amazon, by chipping away at primary care, might end up there. But they are certainly going to be using what they know and what they understand to improve, to allow other people who are going to be delivering healthcare to improve their stuff, so to improve their experience. So, Ali said, if you can find somebody who can do it better, they'll use that at Babylon. That will be common amongst many companies. And I'm sure there will be things that Google produce in terms of translation and AI and analytics and stuff like that, which get used commonly, as they are now, which gets used commonly. And there'll be areas where they particularly say, we're going to focus on this one thing, whether it's the brain behind the self-driving car, it's a way to do drug discovery in a better way. They have various assets across the board in health and outside of health. You'll see them all being used. I don't think we're going to replace the Mayo Clinic or United Health Group with Google. But, I didn't think Donald Trump was going to be president of America, so what do I know?
Well, thank you very much, Matthew. And I would like to invite now Manish Kohli. Manish Kohli is on the call here, and Manish was the ex-chairman of board of HIMSS, and he's been working a lot in the digitalization of the Middle East, and we want to bring him live to comment on actually how has he been seeing the change in the landscape and the ecosystem of the Middle East. And I forgot to say, actually, Manish has been a long collaborator of Health 2.0 Egypt. He came to Egypt twice for 2 of our events in less than 3 months. So thank you very much for that, Manish. And so I want you to comment, please, on how do you see the ecosystem changing and the digitalization efforts of the government changing in the Middle East in the past few years.
Good afternoon. Good evening, guys. A wonderful panel. Pleasure to see familiar faces, and nice to meet you, Ali and Matthew. I think this is a renaissance moment in healthcare. I think, everybody has sort of woken up saying that, oh my gosh, we have to do things differently. And sometimes it takes an external threat really to shape the world that we live in. I think as I have seen, the Middle East evolve, you've seen a lot of hospitals achieve stage 6 and 7 from the HIMSS MRAM criteria. There's been a lot of investment in technology. In fact, if you look at some of the data in the UAE, an average citizen owns 1.96 mobile phones. So the penetration of technology is definitely not the issue. You definitely have the funding, especially in the GCC countries, And you have the talent from the neighboring countries, Egypt, Jordan, India, Turkey. So you have a nice ecosystem that's ready to deliver value. And I think what Ali said earlier, this is not the time for us to replicate. It is time for us to reinvent. And I think the GCC and the Middle East as a region has that opportunity right now to take a step back and say, how do we actually do a better job of delivering health and care to the individuals? And I think that's the irony of the whole thing. We are in healthcare, but we all have the sense that health and care are both lacking at some level. And I think with the drivers in place, especially with COVID, it's a golden opportunity for us to strike gold. Ali said we spend $10 trillion annually in healthcare. 30% of that is wasted. Now imagine we have $3 trillion that we now have to re-optimize. And I think that's really where the opportunity is. We have an unmet need. We definitely have the resources. We have under-leveraged technology. And I'll even go a step further. We have under-leveraged data. One of the most data-intensive industries is I think the most inadequate job of leveraging data for better decision-making. So if we can leverage technologies like telehealth and artificial intelligence to really optimize the ecosystem and deliver value by leveraging data and delivering insights, not only to the frontline physician, but the community health worker in Rwanda or the CEO of Mayo Clinic, that is, I think, what success looks like. And at the end, I, as a patient, would benefit because I'm getting the care that I need, when I need it, where I need it. And when you look at just investment in healthcare, we've built a healthcare model around building business class seats for many years, right? We count access in terms of number of hospital beds. Is that really the best measure for us to design and develop healthcare system? So I do think this is a fundamental shift where policymakers, payers, providers are all going to come together and say, let's do this differently. And I think those who do embrace and adopt this opportunity are going to be hugely successful.
Manish and Ali, if I can comment on this. So both of you have been saying that the Middle East has a golden opportunity to reinvent healthcare. However, you see that the decision, so the experts are coming from the West who have implemented this earlier, and the decision makers in the Middle East are kind of stuck on benchmarks and best practice experience. So it's kind of a vicious loop. So you say, no, you have to do new things here. They say, okay, but the experts are saying otherwise, and the experts from the West are trying to replicate what they know, and so how do you think you can break this cycle?
Shall I go?
Yeah.
I'm very interested to hear what Manish says about it, but I'll go. I think, Yara, you touched on a fundamental problem in healthcare, right? Because if you are, imagine a minister of health, right? You have to, by definition, surround yourself with a number of doctor experts, right, who know what they know, and they will invite you to do basically what they know, right? And in healthcare, we have this thing of evidence-based, right, which fundamentally it's an evidence-based on innovation is almost an oxymoron, right? Because if it's an innovation, there is no evidence until the innovation happens, right? So you have this challenge. I mean, this RFP I just told you about, I was just looking at something. It was asking for a brand new model of healthcare, which is actually very well defined. But then later on, it says applicants should have 3 to 5 years experience of having delivered that. Well, if it's brand new, nobody has delivered it anywhere, right? to the point that you were raising. I think, and if you look at all the companies Matthew just mentioned, that are now the giants of healthcare, giants of technology, Amazon, Google, Microsoft. None of these people had to ask permission from anyone. They basically created a product that the population loved, and they get more and more on it. But imagine if they had to sell to governments. The first Amazon needed to sell to a government as opposed to deliver that. Like, how impossible would it be? So you did put your finger on something really important. You also have another problem in Middle East because we have many Middle Eastern entrepreneurs in here. And in Middle East, in most of the world now, or in the Western world now, we have what I call supremacy of innovation. There is a huge amount of money chasing innovation.
I'm very sorry. Yeah, I'll just stop you to say goodbye to Matthew, who's joining, has another session on his own that we can, he just sent a link to, by the way.
More than lonely, come see mine, but I host my own at 1 p.m. East West Coast time on Thursday. So thanks so much, Ali. Great to see you again.
Good to see you, my friend.
Thanks to all the moderators. Great show, everybody.
Bye. Thank you so much, Matthew.
Bye-bye.
Pleasure having you.
Sorry, Ali, if you can continue, please. Sorry.
No, thank you. I was just going to say, immediately you have another problem.
Yeah, you have another problem.
And the problem you have is supremacy of capital versus innovation or innovators, right? So while in Silicon Valley, if you have an idea, there are many people chasing to finance your idea, and you have this. I was talking to an entrepreneur the other day. They've raised a few $1 million and have already given vast majority of their business away. Vast majority, right, of their business away for a few $1 million, right? And there is this expectation of capital that if I give you a little money, I have to own most of your business, right? And then I have to sit on your board and I have to tell you what to do, right? And that cultural issue, I think, is a significant problem against the growth of entrepreneurialism in Middle East. And the best so my encouragement to entrepreneurs is look globally for your capital. If you can't find what you need locally. But you need to overcome both of those in healthcare. The point that you rightly raised, Yara, about the catch-22 of evidence-based innovation, but also the point about finding a capital that gives people the ability to take rewards from their innovation.
Thank you very much, Ali. Manish, do you have anything to comment on that? Working in the Middle East, and you have.
I agree with Ali 100%. I think two fundamental things, right? How do you create innovation? And I think one of the things that Matthew mentioned earlier, right? What Silicon Valley has done well is brought top minds and tech companies and VC money into one ecosystem and sort of broken the rules. And how do you replicate that model elsewhere? And I think one of the fundamental things, you have to look at the educational systems. And I really think that right now the competition is for top talent. And that can be a rate limiting step for a startup. Because everybody, look at, for instance, data scientists, right? Everybody is asking for that talent. And there are very few universities producing that. So I think if you're talking to a policymaker, you have to start thinking about what is the problem, not today, in the future that needs to be solved. And how do I create a sustainable ecosystem that centers on strong educational programs, strong incentives, and really strong drivers for change? Because an entrepreneur needs to see opportunity, and a VC needs to see returns on investment. And an entrepreneur right now should look globally, because right now the risk becomes too high if you're simply looking at it.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Manish. I think we're approaching our end of our time. So
yeah, we are. But building on that question, I want to give Ali just one last shot to quickly give us an answer to Engineer Mohammed Noor's question, who's the digital health correspondent of the WHO here in Egypt. And he's asking something based on, Manish is talking about education, and his question is about how can you upskill patients, not necessarily talent, but also patients, to access healthcare services when there's no access to learning services. So in places where education might not be accessible, can this still work?
I mean, fundamentally, the challenge is to make your technology so simple that anybody can access it, right? I mean, when we first started Babylon, that was six years ago. My 14-year-old at the time was 7-8 years old. He was the big tester of our product, because everything we produce, I would put it in front of him on my mobile and say, can you make an appointment with a doctor for me, right? And if you couldn't get there within a few taps, I would go back and say that at that time, we didn't have the kind of verbal technology we have today, right? So anybody can talk. If we can create create voice technology that can talk to somebody, understand them, and respond to them in voice, anybody can access technology. So the challenge comes back to the technologies, and exactly what Yara said: leave no one behind. That should be the motto. That's why we went to Rwanda. We learned so much from people in Rwanda. And I think that should be the motto for entrepreneurs. Look, I leave you with this. I was born in a middle-class family in my country. I did very well, but then I had to leave. I became a refugee. I suffered from the kind of poverty I don't wish on anybody. I used to be rich. I was being both poor and rich. I've been both young, and I'm much older now. I've been a native and I've been an immigrant, right? But what I saw in my life, it doesn't really matter if you're rich, poor, insider, outsider, young, old. People all over the world have the same desires. They have just different opportunities. Be the agent of bringing that opportunity to everybody, as opposed to getting rich on the ability of a few. And that's what, if entrepreneurs do that, we'll all do very well.
Yeah, definitely. It's very interesting to think at the bottom of the pyramid, and how, again, you can build a sustainable business by thinking of
how do you reach the last mile in healthcare?
Yeah, it's we're
reaching
very interesting
it, right, guys? We're reaching. It's not hard. Don't make it sound hard, right? We're doing it in Rwanda. We're doing it in Britain. We serve with the same price the managing director of some of the biggest financial institutions in London, and we serve some of the poorest people in London, right? It's not hard. If you're on Amazon Prime, it doesn't matter if you're rich or poor, you get your delivery through the door, right? I mean, don't make these things sound hard. They are hard, but they are very doable. Just don't take the easy way. Life, by the way, if you take the easy way, you lose as an entrepreneur anyways, because if it's easy, everybody else will copy it, right? So find the hard problem, solve the hard problem. It's much harder for anybody else to get there. And as Matthew was saying earlier, people will throw a lot of stone at you. That's great. Catch the stones that are good, right? And add it to your armory, right? And the ones that are not, let it go, dodge them. But focus on doing really well. We will. There is no question in my head that when we sit here together in a number of years, whether that's 2 years, 10 years, 20 years, doesn't really matter. By the way, somebody's going to quote me and say, he said 2 years, right? I can't say, I just don't know whether it's 10 years, 20 years, 10 years. It doesn't really matter. What matters is healthcare will soon become accessible, affordable for everybody on earth. Education will at some stage soon become accessible, affordable for everybody on earth. And you and I will leave a legacy behind that can, if you're part of that. Westinghouse, who brought electricity to the United States, used to say, if you want to be famous, go kill a president, assassinate a president. But if you want to make a difference, go make the world a better place than that you find it. Every entrepreneur on this call has the opportunity to leave our community a better place than we found it and we entered it. And there is no reason why we shouldn't. And so I wish everybody a success. If you see an entrepreneur, somebody with an idea, just cheer them up. And to those entrepreneurs, just don't let anybody with any negative feeling to be around you. Even among your friends, negativity, it's just a dreadful thing. Don't let them inherit you, even in your personal life. Believe in yourself. We will make the world a better place between us, all entrepreneurs. I can't wait to come to Egypt and meet you all. Or to wherever you are. But thank you so much for
Ali, thank
your
you.
generosity with your time and your thoughts and giving me the opportunity to talk to you tonight.
Well, thank you very much, Ali. It has been really, really inspiring and actually motivating. I'm sure a lot of the audience here will agree with it. And there was a lot of interesting ideas, and I have some quotes of it now.
Yeah, and I'd like to add thank you for sharing your story so genuinely and so unfiltered. it's been really inspiring, and this idea of let's not make things sound harder than they are is something that's a very nice takeaway. I think there's no better thought to leave with everyone, but think of it first, and then it will happen. And Ali, you're the true living experience of that. Thank you so much. This has been, I'm sure, thank you for the audience for staying much longer than scheduled. I think it's been a very engaging conversation. Touched upon a lot of things that we could have really dug in a couple more hours in. Thanks for expanding our horizons. Thanks for our moderators, Ahmed Morsi and Abdul Latif, for making this a very special episode. Thank you, Yoro, for the amazing moderation and sharing your knowledge with us. Manish, thank you so much for being with us. You made this one much more special. Manish has been someone that's been a huge supporter of us. Really enjoyed your inputs, everyone, and please do leave us your feedback. This concludes the series that we've been holding in Ramadan, but we'll be back. We will send you emails about what's next, and a lot of things that came out through these episodes deserve a much deeper dive.